Hi, this is Brian with Sampleso, and in this tutorial we're going to cover FloppyTron's LFO and step sequencer. So the step sequencer, unlike conventional step sequencers which sequence a note or a groove pattern, FloppyTron's step sequencer modulates parameters. So jumping right into the step sequencer, you can see that we have two independent patterns, and each one of them can modulate volume, pan, distortion amount, filter cutoff, and resonance. And you can control the amount of modulation fitting into each of those parameters in the sliders below. So in order to have the filter cutoff and resonance modulation take effect, we need to use the power button next to its faders. And once activated, you can choose the amount of modulation. Also, you can now control the default parameters for the filter. So going up the sequencer, we can see our pattern. You can use your mouse to draw individual steps in order to create your own pattern. Holding Command or Control for Windows will initialize the current step, while holding Shift will give you finer control of the value. Alternatively, you can use one of our 48 pre-made patterns by using the Load Pattern button down below. The pattern can have anywhere between 2 and 32 steps, and if your sequence contains less than 32 steps, you can scroll to view the hidden extra steps using the right arrow to explore different patterns. You can always go back using the left arrow. So the sequencer can act in two ways, unipolar or bipolar mode, and these will change depending on the parameters you're modulating. So essentially, filter cutoff and pan work in bipolar mode, meaning you can modulate the filter's cutoff in positive and negative amounts depending on your filter's default position, and you can modulate the pan left and right. Volume, distortion amount, and resonance will work in unipolar mode, basically from 0 to 100%, or in FloppyTron's case, from 0 to 500. You can still use the same sequencer to modulate both unipolar and bipolar parameters at the same time. Just keep in mind that unipolar parameters will read negative values as positive values. For instance, in this example, I have both filter and volume being modulated, and the values that goes about halfway in the negative direction will be shown halfway in the unipolar mode. So going over to the top of the sequencer, we can choose the sequencer speed by selecting a note value ranging from 128th to a full bar. We can double that amount by 2, reaching some extreme fast sequences. The up and down sliders introduces a fade in and fade out to each individual step, creating even more elaborate textures. Next to that, we have the sequence play mode, which can be set to loop, freeze, which will freeze the modulation at the last step until all notes are released, or one shot, which will play the sequence once and then turn off the modulation and its parameters. Clicking the plus button reveals some extra features that were not available in the main window. So the first meld button will logically convert bipolar data to unipolar data, so that 0 will be exactly in the middle in 250, and negative values will be below that, and positive values will be above that. The second meld button converts unipolar data into bipolar data. The first flip button will flip the values relative to themselves, meaning 350 will turn to 150, while negative 300 will turn to negative 200, and so on. The second flip button just flips the negative and positive values and works best in bipolar mode. Now, I know all of this can look a bit daunting and confusing, but really it makes a lot of sense. And what it really means is that this feature can be as simple as laying down a pattern and start playing, or you can dive deep into the step sequencer and create intricate and advanced modulations, or you can just mash buttons and get some happy accidents that you wouldn't otherwise come up with. Either way, there is definitely a use for any kind of musician, composer, or producer in this synth. So lastly, the LFO is a similar cut-down version of the step sequencer, but instead of steps, we have LFO shapes, which can be loaded from the load wave window. You can set the LFO start position by sliding the highlighted window on the LFO shape, and finally, in, hold, and out will fade in and out the modulation amount, while the in fader determines the fade-in duration. Hold will control how long the modulation will be held in full amount, and out determines the fade-out duration. It's worth mentioning that while hold is all the way up, the fade-out fader will be disabled, and the modulation will stay at its maximum value indefinitely. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and you can see now how simple and how complex the synth can be. So go explore some of those features and create some awesome and interesting sounds, and don't forget to visit Sampleso's website for more information and more tutorials, and I will see you in the next video.